On the morning of October 14th, a Forest Service ranger named Deb Hollis drove the service road into the Uinta survey grid because a federal resurvey crew had missed their scheduled check-in by 48 hours. She had done this kind of welfare check before. Usually it was a satellite communicator with dead batteries or a crew that had pushed their timeline and forgotten to call. She told herself that on the drive up. The camp was intact. That was the first thing she noted. 3 vehicles parked in a row, noses pointed downhill toward the road, as if staged for a quick departure that never happened. A folding table with food still on it, a camp stove with a pot of something that had long since gone cold. Survey equipment laid out in sequence on a ground cloth, the way a professional lays out tools before a job, not the way anyone leaves them when they are done. She walked the perimeter. She called out. Nothing answered. 1 coffee cup sat on the hood of the middle vehicle. She touched it. The outside of the cup was cold. The inside was still faintly warm. She stood next to that cup for a long time. Before she called it in, she walked to the north edge of the camp. She had parked her own truck near the survey marker at the trailhead. She remembered the marker clearly. She had parked almost touching it. It was a steel post, the standard orange and silver, driven deep into frozen ground, anchored with the kind of effort that requires a manual driver and 2 people taking turns. The marker was gone from the trailhead. She found it 400 meters uphill, planted in a small clearing, driven to the same depth, perfectly vertical. The ground around it showed no disturbance, no tool marks, no footprints in the frost. She stood in that clearing for 11 minutes. She has never explained what she was thinking during those 11 minutes. She went back to her truck and called it in. The official search ran for 6 days.
2 members of the survey crew were found in separate clearings, both miles from camp, both on their backs, arms crossed over their chests. The official cause of death was listed as equipment-related accident and exposure. The positioning was not mentioned in any report filed with the agency, the county sheriff, or the insurance carrier. A 3rd crew member was never found. The case was closed in 19 days. The site was abandoned by the contracting agency within a month. Listen closely. My name is Ellen Marsh. I have been leading remote field crews for 15 years. Before this contract, I had worked sites in 4 states, logged over 800 days in backcountry terrain, and never lost a crew member to anything more serious than a sprained ankle. I held certifications in wilderness first response, remote communications, and federal land navigation protocols. I was considered by the people who hired me to be exactly the right person for a job like this. I am telling you this not because I want credit. I am telling you this because I need you to understand that what happened in the Uinta Mountains in early October was not the result of inexperience or carelessness or any failure of preparation. We were the right people. We had done everything correctly. It did not matter. The contract was a federal land boundary resurvey in a section of the Uinta Mountains in northeastern Utah. The grid covered roughly 12 square miles of high-elevation forest, most of it above 8,000 feet. The job was to re-establish survey markers that had been placed in the 1980s and verify boundary coordinates against current satellite data. Standard work, the kind of job that gets done dozens of times a year across the country with no incident. We were 6 people. I was the survey lead. I kept a green mileage notebook in my left breast pocket on every job, the same brand I had used since my 2nd year in the field. I recorded distances walked, time on task, equipment anomalies, weather observations. It was a habit that had saved jobs before. I want you to know it existed because it will matter later, and because it is gone now, and I think about that more than I probably should. Darnell Price was our equipment technician. He was 41 years old and had the specific kind of calm that comes from knowing how every piece of equipment around you works and exactly what it will take to fix it when it breaks. He would not start his morning until the generator had run for exactly 3 minutes. He said it was the way the carburetor seated at elevation. It was probably also ritual. Darnell understood that machines have rhythms, and he respected them. Sophia Reyes was our data analyst. She had a master's degree in geospatial science and an absolute commitment to rational explanation that I respected enormously. She brought the same card game on every job, a worn deck of rummy cards with a rubber band around them, and she never finished a game. She would set it up after dinner, and then something would need doing, and the cards would get packed away, and the game would carry over to the next night and never conclude. I do not know if she is still alive. I have not been able to find out. Marcus Webb was our junior surveyor. He was 27, and this was his first major remote contract. He called his daughter every evening at 7 on the satellite phone, right after dinner, without fail. Her name was Lily. She had just started 2nd grade. He talked about her the way new parents talk about their children, like she was the organizing principle of everything. Every long drive, every cold morning, every frustrating day of data work pointed back to her. He had her photo laminated and kept it in his equipment case. Pete Callahan was our senior GPS specialist. He had 22 years in the field. He had worked more remote contracts than anyone I had known personally.
He was not a fearful man. I need you to understand that clearly before I tell you what he said later. Pete was not someone who scared easily, or who scared at all, in my experience. That is exactly why, when he voted to leave, I should have listened. Linda O'Coffer was our logistics coordinator. She maintained a laminated checklist that covered every piece of equipment we carried, every consumable, every emergency supply. She checked it every morning and every evening. She had a rule that she would not touch any piece of equipment before her 2nd cup of coffee, and she enforced this rule with the same seriousness she brought to everything else. Linda was the most organized person I have ever worked with. The fact that the organization made no difference is something I have spent a great deal of time thinking about. We arrived at the staging area on a Tuesday in early October. The weather was clear, the road was accessible, and the forest was exactly what the briefing documents had described. We set up camp in the lower grid clearing, ran equipment checks, and had dinner around the camp table while Linda went through her laminated checklist for the 2nd time that day. The generator ran. The satellite phone connected. Darnell reported everything in order. Marcus called Lily at 7. The cards came out. Nobody finished the game. We worked the first 3 days without incident. The routine settled in the way it always does on good crews. Morning calibration started at 6:30, after coffee and before the light fully built. By 8, we were moving into the grid. The work was methodical, locating old markers, verifying coordinates, noting discrepancies, planting replacement posts where needed. We covered roughly 2 miles of grid per day in that terrain, which was on schedule. Some of the 1980s markers were in excellent shape, still readable, still plumb. Others had heaved with frost cycles and needed resetting. Darnell carried a portable driver and a roll of orange flagging, and he would set each post with the same focused economy of motion. 3 strikes to test depth, 1 final adjustment for vertical, a length of flagging tied at the top. He had done it so many times that it looked choreographed. Sophia processed the coordinate data each evening at the camp table, cross-referencing our field readings against the satellite overlay. She found 3 small discrepancies on the first day that turned out to be datum errors in the original 1980s survey. She was pleased by this in the quiet way she was pleased by things, a slight straightening of posture, a note made with particular care. Errors in old data that can be corrected are satisfying. They are a problem with a known shape. Marcus was learning. He was careful, and he asked good questions, and he was getting faster. By the end of the second day, he was running the GPS receiver at the same pace as Pete, who had been running GPS for longer than Marcus had been working professionally. Pete noticed and said so at dinner, which was not something Pete did easily. Marcus called Lily at 7 and told her he was having a good day. The forest was quiet in the way high-elevation forests are quiet in October, when most of the birds have already moved and the mammals are preparing for winter. It was a comfortable quiet. It felt earned. The light at elevation in early October has a particular quality, very clear and very flat, that makes distances hard to judge and makes the work feel both precise and slightly unreal. I had always liked that quality. I had always thought it was one of the better things about working at altitude. Linda kept us organized. She knew where every piece of equipment was at all times, which tent held which supply, which vehicle carried which backup.
She did her evening checklist with a headlamp at the equipment table while the rest of us ate, and then she joined us when she was satisfied, and she always seemed satisfied. She drank her 2 cups of coffee each morning before she touched a single piece of equipment, and the crew respected this without being asked to. It was simply understood. On the third day, Marcus mentioned something at dinner. He said that the North Ridge tree line looked closer at dusk than it did at noon. He had been noting compass bearings to a distinctive dead spruce on the ridge as an informal position check, and the evening bearing was reading slightly different from the midday bearing. He thought it might be atmospheric refraction, light bending differently at lower sun angles, a known phenomenon at elevation that could slightly distort apparent distances. He noted it once and then let it go, and nobody responded to it, and the dinner moved on to other things. Darnell said that evening that the generator was running slightly rough, and he thought it was the elevation and the cooling temperatures. He had already adjusted the fuel mix twice. He was not concerned. He said he would keep an eye on it and probably pull the carburetor in the morning for a quick clean. That night, after 4 in the afternoon, the forest went completely silent. No wind, no bird calls, nothing that moved. We were all in camp by then, and we all noticed it. Pete said elevation and barometric change could suppress wildlife sound, particularly in late afternoon when temperature inversion layers settled. Nobody argued with him. It was a plausible explanation. We ate dinner and cleaned up and went to our tents. I lay awake for a while. I have done that on many jobs. The silence had a texture to it that I did not entirely like, but I did not have language for that at the time, so I filed it as fatigue and closed my eyes. I did not think it was unusual. I think about that now.
On the 4th day, Sophia found the perimeter line. She almost walked through it on the way to the morning's first grid point. She stopped and crouched and called me over, and we stood looking at it together. It was a continuous track, pressed into the frost and the thin layer of snow from the night before, circling the camp at a distance of approximately 90 meters. The stride length was roughly 6 feet, measured by Sophia with the survey tape she carried on her belt. The track was unbroken. There were no gaps where it turned. It circled the camp completely. Sophia measured the distance from 3 reference points and determined that the circle was consistent in radius to within about 2 feet all the way around. She photographed it from multiple angles. She said that the stride length and spacing were consistent with a large elk following a scent boundary, which was a known behavior in territorial animals, and that the mathematical regularity was within the range of what large ungulates could produce when moving with purpose. She was almost right. I understood that then. I understand it better now. We documented the track and continued working. We did not talk about it much that day. On the 5th day, the track was there again, same distance, same radius. This time, there were 2 circuits, one inside the other, separated by about 4 feet.
The inner circuit showed shorter stride intervals, as if whatever had made it had slowed down. Pete sat down that evening and said he wanted to vote on whether to continue the contract. He said it plainly. He said the track pattern was not animal behavior he recognized, and that the concentric structure of the second night's circuit suggested a systematic approach rather than a territorial marking pass. He said he had worked this kind of terrain for 22 years, and he had never seen a perimeter like that, and that when he did not recognize something in the field after 22 years, that was meaningful.
The vote was 4-1 to continue. Linda abstained. She said she needed to think about it. I logged the vote in my green notebook with the date and each person's position. I do not know why I logged it. Professional habit, I suppose. It felt like something that should be on record. I have thought about that vote more than almost anything else. On the morning of the 6th day, Darnell found the satellite communicator. It was sitting on the equipment table where Linda had left it the night before, fully packed in its case, latch secured. Darnell opened it for the morning check and found the internal communications board removed. The board was gone, not broken, not damaged, removed. The casing had been relatched from the outside. There was no forced entry, no scratch marks on the latch, no indication that the case had been opened by anything other than the same careful hands that had closed it. We checked the solar radio next. The antenna had been separated from the housing. It was coiled neatly and placed under the unit. The coil was tight and even, like something wound by a machine. Nobody said anything for almost a minute. Then Sophia said that someone could have gotten into camp during the night. She said it as a hypothesis, not a statement of belief. She was doing what she always did, which was finding the explanation that fit within the known world. Darnell pointed out that we were 6 people in 4 tents, spread around a clearing, and that entering the equipment table area without waking anyone would have required moving through the camp silently in complete darkness, and that the removal of the communicator's internal board required not just access, but mechanical knowledge of that specific unit, and a tool precise enough to extract board-mounted connectors without leaving marks on the housing. Sophia acknowledged this and did not offer a different explanation. She did not have one. Neither did any of us. We ate breakfast and tried to work through what we had. We had no outgoing communication. We had 2 vehicles in working order. We had food and water for another 6 days. The closest point of outside contact was the ranger station at the base of the service road, approximately 9 miles down. Driving out was an option. It was on the table. Nobody called for a vote. We were not yet at the place where we believed there was something to vote about. Marcus said he was going to go check the south grid markers as scheduled. I told him to take a partner. He said Pete was in the middle of a GPS calibration sequence he did not want to interrupt, and that the south markers were only about 300 meters from camp, and that he had walked that stretch a dozen times over the previous days without incident. He would be back within 40 minutes. He was already pulling on his pack when he said it. I should have stopped him. I have gone over that moment more times than I can count, and I cannot find the version where I make a different choice in the seconds I had to make it. He was right that it was a short walk. He was right that we had done it before. He was gone before I finished thinking about it. I noted the time in my green notebook. 11:42 in the morning. I noted the direction of travel and the expected return time. That is the kind of thing I did. That is the kind of person I was. He did not return at 12:20. He did not return at 12:40. At 5 in the afternoon, when Marcus had not returned, we went to look for him. We went in pairs, the way we should have been moving all along. Sophia and Linda checked the south marker path. Pete and I checked the terrain north of the path where a small draw dropped away from the main grade. We called his name at intervals. The forest returned nothing. The silence that had settled on the 3rd evening had not lifted. It had become a condition rather than an event. We found his GPS unit on a flat rock about 240 meters from camp, slightly off the south path in the direction of the draw. It was still recording. The indicator light was green. He had set it down deliberately on the only flat surface in the area. He had chosen a place where someone would find it. We took it back to camp and played the audio. 4 minutes and 22 seconds of ambient forest sound, very quiet, and then a change in the quality of the silence that I do not have a precise word for, and then the recording ended. There was nothing on it that I can describe to you directly. I will not describe it directly. I will tell you only that after we played it, Sophia sat with her hands folded on the table for a long time without speaking, which was not something Sophia ever did. We did not find Marcus. We did not find his pack or his flagging tape or any disturbance in the frost that showed us where he had gone from that rock. Whatever had happened without leaving the kind of evidence that surveys are designed to find. We implemented a paired movement rule. No one outside the camp for any reason without a partner. We concentrated the remaining equipment into the 2 central tents. We kept the camp stove running through the night for light and warmth, and because doing something felt necessary. Nobody talked very much. The card game sat on the table with the rubber band still around it. Darnell had a small wrench in his hand for most of the evening, turning it over and over, the way he did when he was working through something he could not fix. That night, the perimeter circuit was 3 tracks. The innermost was 60 meters from camp. On the 8th day, Pete and I went to clear the road. The previous afternoon, we had decided that with communications out and 1 crew member missing, the correct action was to drive out, report, and send help back in. It was the only logical decision remaining. The road was blocked. Not by a single fallen tree or weather event. By 11 trees laid in sequence across the road at intervals of about 30 feet, starting 200 meters downhill from camp and continuing for roughly 300 meters. The trees had been pushed across the road, not fallen. The root balls were extracted, the root systems intact, the trunks still holding their canopy. The sequence ran from the upper end of the blockage to the lower, which was the only order in which the work could have been done efficiently, because each tree laid above provided a lever point for the next. The root holes in the ground were clean. The extraction had happened over multiple nights. We stood in the road for a long time looking at it. Pete said it knew we would try to leave today. He said it quietly. He was not speaking to me in particular. He was speaking as someone arriving at the end of a long calculation. I thought about what Marcus had said on the 3rd evening, about the tree line looking closer at dusk. I understood then that he had been right. Something had been reducing the distance, incrementally, testing what we noticed and what we ignored. We went back to camp. On the 9th day, we spent 6 hours moving the first 3 trees by hand. It was the most we could clear in a day working as a group while maintaining the paired movement rule. 9 trees remained. Darnell estimated 2 more full days of clearing to open the road enough for a vehicle. Linda was doing an inventory in the supply tent. Pete and I were working on the 3rd tree, about 40 meters from camp, when we heard Linda. Not a scream, something shorter, a single sound with no follow-up. We ran back. The supply tent was open. The laminated checklist was on the ground just inside the entrance. The tent showed no damage. The back panel, which was not an exit, had been opened, not torn. The zipper had been used. We found no other trace of Linda. Pete and I stood outside the tent, and I watched him process it. He was the most experienced person I had ever worked with. He had 22 years. He stood there, and his face did something I had not seen it do before.
And then he put it away and looked at me and said we needed to be inside by dark. That night, Sophia told us what she had been working on. She had been reviewing the grid survey records from the previous decade, which she had downloaded before we lost communications. There were 3 prior survey crews that had worked overlapping sections of this grid over 14 years. 2 had reported anomalous track evidence and equipment interference in their field notes, marked as unexplained and filed without follow-up. The 3rd crew's records ended mid-survey with a notation of emergency extraction. The extraction record was not in the file. Sophia had also found a reference in the historical land use documentation attached to the contract to what was described as Ute behavioral protocols for the northern Uinta zone. The document referenced a set of rules for movement and camp placement derived from what the language called inherited observational knowledge. The full text of the protocol was not included, only a summary, and the summary said that the zone was considered actively managed by a presence that the protocol did not name, and that the behavioral rules existed to avoid engagement rather than to prevent it. The document had been in the contract file. Nobody had flagged it. Nobody had read past the land use summary. Sophia laid this out for us at the camp table while the stove burned. She was composed and precise, the way she always was. When she finished, she put the documents down and looked at us and said, "It was not hunting us. It was removing us, the way you remove anything from a place that was never meant for it." On the 10th day, we cleared 1 more tree from the road and determined that the largest vehicle could pass if driven carefully.
We loaded everything we could carry in under 20 minutes. Darnell, Sophia, Pete, and I. We put what remained of the equipment in the back. Darnell drove because he knew the vehicle best. We left at 4 in the afternoon to make the descent before full dark. We did not make it before full dark. The road runs down through a series of switchbacks before opening onto a longer, straight descent through dense spruce. We were on the straight section, headlights on, moving at about 15 miles per hour over the rough grade, when Darnell slowed. Something was standing in the road. It was centered in the lane. It was not moving. Darnell triangulated the height against a spruce at the road's edge that we had marked and measured earlier in the survey. The spruce was 22 feet tall. The thing in the road reached the lower third of the spruce's canopy. We agreed afterward on approximately 8 feet 6 inches. The proportions were wrong in ways that I have tried to describe many times and cannot describe adequately. The shoulder width exceeded the width of the vehicle's side mirrors, which on that truck measured 68 inches. The arms were not where arms should be relative to the torso. The relationship between the length of the limbs and the length of the body was inverted from any ratio I could name. It was standing on 2 legs. That much I can say with certainty. It did not move. Darnell brought the vehicle to a near stop about 60 feet out. We sat with the headlights on it. It did not react to the lights. It did not turn away or shield its face. It stood and it observed, the way something observes when it already knows what is going to happen. Darnell said, "I'm going to accelerate." He gave it time. He waited 3 seconds, which felt very long. He pressed the accelerator. The thing moved at the last moment. Not backward, not off the road. Laterally. It moved to the side with a single fluid motion that covered about 12 feet, and as we passed the point where it had been standing, it was no longer in our headlights. I turned to look through the rear window. There were more of them at the tree line. I do not know how many. More than 2. They were at the edge of the headlight range, and I had only a moment to see them before we went around the next curve. Something hit the vehicle from above. I do not know what it was. The roof buckled inward. Darnell overcorrected. We went off the right side of the road into the embankment, and the vehicle rolled once and came to rest on its side in the drainage ditch. Darnell did not survive the impact. I will not describe his specific injuries. I will tell you only that it was immediate and that he did not suffer. The 3 of us who were conscious pulled ourselves out through the broken windshield. Pete had a laceration across his forearm that was bleeding significantly. Sophia had hit her head and was moving slowly. I had cracked 2 ribs. We were on our feet within 5 minutes. They were behind us in the road, not in the ditch, in the road. I say they because there were at least 3. I could not see them clearly. I could hear them, not sound exactly, a displacement of air, the sense of something large and deliberate occupying the space behind us. We walked. They followed. Not running, not gaining, maintaining a fixed distance behind us down the road. We walked for what I estimate was 2 hours in the dark, Pete with his arm wrapped tight and Sophia gripping my jacket, and they were behind us the entire time, fixed distance, patient. When the sky began to show the first gray before dawn, when the road emerged from the canopy into the more open lower terrain, they stopped. We walked another 100 meters and looked back. They were at the tree line, standing, not moving. They did not come any further.
I do not know if it was the light or if they had already finished what they came to do. We reached the ranger station at first light. A service truck found us on the lower service road about 40 minutes after sunrise. We were treated at the county hospital. Pete was admitted for blood loss and observation. Pete was discharged 3 days later. He went back. I do not know what he went back for. He did not tell me. He told the hospital discharge nurse that he was going to stay with family. I found out 2 weeks later from the ranger station when they called me to confirm his description of the site for their report. He had signed out a vehicle. He had driven back up the service road. The vehicle was found at the trailhead. Pete was not. He is the one that was never recovered. The official report cited equipment failure and exposure. 2 bodies had been found, Marcus and Linda, in separate clearings miles from each other, both on their backs, arms crossed, in open ground. The positioning was not mentioned in the report. The survey supervisor I spoke to afterward told me that the positioning was noted by the search team and attributed to displacement by scavengers. I did not argue with him. I understood by then that arguing would not produce anything useful. The door of the supply locker at camp had been opened cleanly from the outside, the latch mechanism fully retracted without any damage to the housing. That detail was not in any filed report. The prints around the camp were measured by one of the search team members as a personal notation, not an official observation. She passed the notation to me informally, outside the official debrief. She did not want it on record. The measurements are not mine to share without her consent, and she has not given it. The site was abandoned by the contracting agency. The contract was canceled. The insurance paid out. The federal grid work was reassigned to a different section. As far as I know, no one currently employed by any agency involved has read the Ute Protocol document, the full text of which has never been released. The summary I described is the only portion that exists in any accessible record. I am speaking now because a second crew was contracted to an adjacent grid section last spring. The grid overlaps the northeastern corner of the area where we worked. I found out through a contact at the agency. I do not know if the crew was warned.
I do not know what the full Ute protocol says because I have never been able to obtain it, and the people I have asked have either not known about it or declined to respond. I will not go back to that forest. I will not take another federal contract without reading every attached land use document. I will not send crew members on solo tasks, ever, regardless of distance or duration. These are the rules I live by now. They are not complicated rules. They should not have been rules I needed to learn. There is a question I have never been able to answer, and it is this: at what point did it begin? Not when we arrived. I am certain it was already watching before we arrived. The perimeter line on the fourth morning was not the beginning of observation. It was the first evidence we were shown. Whether it was shown to us because we were close to finding something or because the schedule had simply arrived, I cannot tell you. The GPS recording from Marcus's unit was submitted to the agency as part of the official evidence package. I have been told it was reviewed and filed. I have asked twice whether the audio can be released. I have not received a response. The forest is still there. The grid is still there. The NUTE protocol exists in a document in a federal land use file that is technically accessible through a records request, though I have been told the relevant sections have been redacted for cultural sensitivity review, which began in the month after our crew went missing and has not concluded.
What the Ute knew, and how long they had known it, and what specifically the protocol was designed to prevent, I cannot tell you. I can tell you that it worked, for as long as people followed it, and I can tell you that we were not told to follow it. And I can tell you that somewhere in the trees above the 8,000-foot line in the Uinta Mountains, something is still there. And if there is a crew in that forest right now, walking a grid in pairs, thinking that the paired movement rule is protection enough, I want you to understand something I wish someone had told me. The pairing was not a defense. It was a courtesy. It let them choose the order.